Welcome back to the New Brunswick Cattle Producers webinar series, featuring some fantastic speakers out of the Quebec system. And so we're into number 2, Dr. Virginie Filteau. So on loan to us this week from Vatiquinol. So thanks for them for making time in the agenda and her agenda for sharing with us today. So a little bit about Dr. Filteau. Won't take up a lot of time because I know we want to get right into the information she's going to present. So been in the vet service since 1995 graduation. Has worked in large animal practice, dairy and beef sector primarily. Then in 2014 entered into the pharmaceutical industry as technical services veterinarian for different territories across Canada. And as her presentation topic denotes today, her area of interest is preventative medicine, calf health, early life calf health, and herd immunization. So Virginie is currently the president of the Beef Cattle Committee of the Centre de Référence en Agriculture du Québec and is employed by Vatiquinol, as mentioned earlier. So Dr. Filteau, thanks so much for being with us today. Really looking forward to your presentation.
So thank you very much for the invitation today. My mandate was to talk about managing colostrum and vaccination on young calves for long-term health. I'll have 3 sections in my presentation, 3 parts. First, the importance of colostrum, and then we'll talk about vaccination for diarrhea problems, and then vaccination for prevention of respiratory problems. But after each section, I will pause briefly so that you can ask questions if you have them. So if you haven't had time to ask questions, we'll have time at the end of the session as well. So we're going to talk about the importance of colostrum. It's the foundation of resistance in the calves. To make sure we're on the same page in terms of vocabulary, I will talk about antibodies. What you have to understand that an antibody is a protein that defends. It's produced by the body to fight against a microbe. So the microbe is blue, the antibodies are in green, and you can see that the antibody adjusts to the surface of the microbe. Antibodies are always specific. So the word antibody can also be used. Another word could be immunoglobulin or IgG. So IgG is the same thing. And we can see that as ammunition. If you are hunters amongst you, you know well that for some types of hunting, whether if you're hunting jackrabbits, you're not going to take the same ammunition that if you're trying to kill a moose. So munitions are also specific. So with bovine, you probably know as during gestation, the mother has a lot of antibodies in her system. She has her own immune system. Those antibodies don't cross the placental barrier. So the antibodies can't, those are big molecules, so they can't cross. So the mother, in order to protect the fetus, she will transfer about half of her own antibodies in the blood. She will secrete them in the mammary gland, and that process will start 3 to 5 weeks before giving birth. So she will fill her milk with half of her own antibodies, and the calf in order to defend itself, will depend on the absorption of that colostrum. So that process, we call that the transfer of immunity. So passive transfer of immunity to bone. So that's a concept that you're already familiar with. Colostrum, the first milk is filled with antibodies. You also need to know is that colostrum is not just antibodies. That first milk is not only antibodies, it's also a package of different growth factors. You have to remember that there's a lot of research done right now on everything that is colostrum management, the impact of it on the growth of the dairy calf. Over the last 10 years, a lot of research and discoveries have been made, and we realize that colostrum really has incredible benefits. We realize what we have here. I'll just go over it quickly. You have all the elements and nutrients that are found in the colostrum, and you have comparisons as a function, whether it's colostrum or the transition milk, and then the mature milk a week later. So what we have between both is that transition milk. So what we see is that in colostrum, there's a lot more energy than the mature milk, more fat, protein, there's immunoglobulins, all other IGF, their growth factor to develop the intestine, lactoferrin, we have lectin. These can influence the development of glands. So all of those things we count about 200 components, and that'll be much smaller quantities once you get to mature milk. So what's really important for us is the immunoglobulin. So the what we found as an advantage, a good absorption of antibodies from the mother to the calf. So reduce mortality. So the less chance of being sick. Also interested growth. The feed conversion is higher for the same for the first 2 months of life. Same genetics, same feeding. The calf that got the right amount of colostrum will have better growth than the others that did not succeed. So reduction of age at puberty, increase of milk production at first and second lactation. And for the meat animals, same thing. Somebody had done research in Texas to colleagues that said that those veals, they were 6 times more at risk to get more disease in the 31st days of life. Those calves did not get good transfer immunity, not enough antibodies from the mothers. They were 5 times more at risk of dying before being weaned. What's interesting in this study, and that's where I mentioned this, even if it's an older study, is that researcher followed calves up to the finishing barn. They measured the yield, and I don't think that study has been redone, but what they found is that calves at birth did not get the proper transfer, that had not gotten enough antibodies from their mothers, were 3 more times susceptible to have respiratory problems in the finishing barn. And that's towards the end of life. So it's not just short-term protection, but it's important for long-term protection. At the time of talking about management or practices that are recommended for colostrum, we can go and look at the codes of practice. Each has their own code of practices in Canada. We have practices that are recommended. So they were established with agronomists, industry, vets, in terms of transpiration, people sitting around the table, and they've set up those requirements. That should be respected when we have when we do. So I went to look at the meat animal protocols. So if you go and look at the code, it's written that for colostrum, make sure that newborns are up to for the high risk. It's a bit vague as a recommendation there. 2 liters colostrum to all calves that was not drinking directly in the first 6 hours of life. So you have to watch the calf to make sure that you really suck from the mother right after birth. And if you have a doubt, you have to intervene if there's a risk. And what are those risks? And we're going to look at what the literature is telling us, things you probably already know that were measured, but for which we have numbers. So when there's a higher risk of the failure of the transfer, whether absorption was too late or whatever, did not happen properly, not enough antibodies in the milk. So difficult birth. So when you intervene, automatically, if you have to help, you should intervene directly in terms of colostrum, maybe to push the calf to the mother. If not, maybe with a gastric input. So difficult birth, you have to be there. You have to make sure to be there. Twins, we know that with twins, there's a competition for the tit, more difficulty in giving birth. A weak calf, when it's less chance of finding the tit to drink strongly. So I did my master's in 2000, and this is where you're tied up in the stable. And I did my work on the transfer of where the cows were tied. There were 10 more times of having a failure of the transfer rather than coming from a female that was unattached. The mother can't turn to stimulate the birth of the calf, and high risk of problems there. So she's going to the next one. Another high risk situation for immunity transfer. So a sick or thin cow, the antibodies are proteins. If the cow is in a nutritional deficit, it'll be hard for her to produce protein in enough quantity or enough milk. Maybe she's used up her own antibodies, so it could lead to a failure. Also, a bad tit that's not well balanced, less strong. It may be a lower production of cholesterol or a gland that's not working properly. So that may need intervention. So cold ambient temperature, more risk of hyperthermia on the calf. and they might not get up, not finding the tit. Again, you might have to intervene to ensure colostrum. So I go back to my practices guide. We've found some cases, so you don't leave nature alone. You have to intervene. In general, when a healthy cow, good condition, easy birth, she can move around in a park or a box. Normally, the calf will get up and get the tit, and you don't have to intervene. But outside those good situations, you have risk, you have to intervene. So I go back to the code of practice. It says colostrum, a commercial one, to all newborns that has signs not to having that first tit, that first milk. If the tit's still full, the calf doesn't seem full, cold mouth, it didn't seem to have, so you have to intervene. How much colostrum should you give? How much? The opinions vary, so I'll try to clarify this. We all know, everybody agrees that all the calves should get at least enough good colostrum right after birth. If I ask a producer, how much do you give? Well, you need good colostrum right after birth. But when we say how close to birth, I'll show you a picture. What you have here is a microscopic view of the intestine of a newborn calf. So it's really magnified here. You have the mucus of the intestine. What I want to show here, what's particular, you'll see a little points. That's a drop of milk that was absorbed. That's good for the first 24 hours. It's a mechanism called micropinocytosis. It allows in the first 24 hours to absorb big molecules instead of digesting them usually, which means that if an antibody arrives, this is a protein. If I then give colostrum at a 1 week old calf, that antibody will be digested. But in the first 24 hours of life, the capacity of absorbing those big droplets. So if it's after 24 hours, it's degraded, it's smaller amounts, the antibody does not keep its function. What you have to know is that this capacity of absorption through the intestinal barrier, it's maximum at the birth. It will disappear gradually over 24 hours. So you have to know that even 12 hours later, you're already halfway of the capacity of absorption of this. You also need to know that if a liquid is in contact with the intestinal mucus within that 24 hours, some liquid, it will accelerate the process of this disappearance. If I give water to the calf before giving him colostrum, I will already have altered the capacity of absorption of the colostrum. So there's a very tight window. So we have the proper moment here, the capacity for absorption, and you have the age in hours. So you see from 0, it's the highest when it's right after birth. 24 hours later, it's practically gone. The best time to give the first meal is the first 6 hours. Actually, the best time are the first 2 hours because even at 6 hours, I'm losing absorption capacity. So if there's lacking antibodies, not same amount of antibodies will be absorbed. So basically important to focus on the first 2 hours. So for good colostrum, so in the milk is diluted, it gives it half its antibodies, and it's diluted into 20 liters. So if the calf drinks only 2 liters, he's gotten less. So what we aim for is that the first meal should consist of the equivalent of 200 grams of IgG, of antibodies in the first meal. That's what we're aiming for. And for the dairy, what we encourage strongly producers to measure the bricks, the amount of not the bricks, but the amount of antibodies in the colostrum. So we encourage dairy producers to take a sample and measure the amount of immunoglobulin. There's a Brix refractometer, that's what I thought, that's used, maple syrup producers use it to measure the sugar in their maple sap, so you can get an indirect measure of antibodies. There are more expensive electronics that do the same thing, but it gives us a percentage. So for dairy, on the Holstein, we know that over 22% gives me about 500 grams. It shows 50 here, but she said 500. So for the Holstein, we'll recommend that they drink up to 4 liters of a colostrum at the first meal. That's a lot. You don't know this for the meat animal, but I still want to give you that information so you know what's happening. So 4 liters and the first meal, if we don't know the value of the colostrum value, we should at least get 200 grams. There's a French team that did the same exercise. They went and milked they milked cows, beef cows, to get the colostrum. They measured that on average, the beef cow had the refractometer about 27% on the bricks, which represents about 100 grams per liter. So what this tells me, by extrapolation, it tells me that if your calf has not drank, if the cow cooperates and you're able to take milk from the colostrum, 1.5 to 2 liters of colostrum should supply from 50 to 100 grams of IgG. So that gives us an idea of what the milk cow can offer, can provide. So when we say enough, we know full well that in the meat cow, it's not something that's easy to do, to try to go and milk an Angus that just gave birth, or just even to get close to it. So how do we know if we've given enough? As I've said before, on the terms of the dairy, the recommendation is, if you don't know what the value is in colostrum, give 4 liters at the first meal. On average, that should be enough protection. For meat animals, it's different. So what we'll say there is it should drink 10 to 12% of its weight in the first 24 hours. I would say I would like the calf to drink the maximum of colostrum right in the first meal. So for 90 pounds, it should be, a 90-pound calf should be about 2 liters drank in the first 24 hours. I would say even to force it in the first meal. So that gives you an idea of the volume. Normally, you should have 150 to 200 grams. So those are things you probably knew already. The other concept over the last few years in terms of managing colostrum is the cleanness of colostrum. We realized that we know that it's to be done given quickly, good quality, but also now we have to make sure that it's clean. We realized that colostrum contaminated or colostrum, which was a bit contaminated, did alter the absorption in the intestine for two reasons. I explained before, with the nature and the process over the first 24 hours that allows to absorb big molecules of milk without digestion. If it's contaminated with bacteria, those bacteria will also be ingested and absorbed there. So they're going to circulate. That's a first aspect. So if the milk's contaminated by bacteria, I may contaminate the calf as well. Also, if the milk is contaminated with bacteria and I have antibodies against those antibodies present in the milk, they're going to attach together. So my antibody will already be used in the milk before being absorbed by the calf. I might have problems with absorption. So it's very important that the milk be clean, that the tit be clean at the time of birth to limit the absorption of bacteria at the time of ingesting the colostrum. So you can see the sides of the cow are gummed up. Want to make sure that the tit is not dirty as well, because you don't want a calf to get a clump of bacteria at the same time. So to get clean colostrum, you need birthing areas that are clean, tits are clean, and this contributes greatly to the success, to the transfer of immunity. So antibodies will be fully used by the calf. Very important in the dairy right now. There are people that they buy equipment to pasteurize the colostrum, but we're not there yet in the beef animals. But other sources of contamination, it could be when you're milking, if they cooperate, it's important to properly clean them. Also very important that your equipment to collect all your containers really be clean, not just rinse. I mean, cleaned up with soap to remove any chance of bacteria. So the milk, you leave it at the ambient temperature. The bacteria doubles every 20 minutes. So it's very important. If you draw the milk, something happens, you can't give it right away, which should be done immediately. You have to refrigerate the colostrum. So if I summarize and I put some numbers on that to clarify the code, you should make sure that your calf drank properly. So problems with whether it's tweens, difficult birth and whatever, you need to bring the calf to the tit and they should get at least 2 liters of non-contaminated colostrum. And I would say within 2 hours after birth. So I'm not sure if there's a question. She's asking Kelly if there's any question. So So the question, if I understood properly, is what is the amount of antibodies that we have in the colostrum? That was my next section. You should know that in the replacement, the two types of colostrum, there are supplements that are done just to add input more antibodies to the colostrum in the mother. That's a supplement in itself. We also replacements. So the replacements for colostrum have a content of IgG that is much higher. I put two examples here. So there's 150 grams. I don't remember if it's per liter or 2 liters, but one bag holds 150 grams. That's excellent for a first meal. I have another one, Colostrum, 100 grams. Here it's a replacement. If you're in a situation when you're not able to milk the cow and you have to give it, I would strongly encourage you to go towards this product. They're more expensive, but it really is worth the cost to invest in those products. So be attentive. Concentrations are there. They're in IgG. We aim for 100 grams for replacements. So I hope I answers that question, and we'll have time for question at the end. So what happens if the calf does not want to suck? I mentioned before, one of the things that the people do a lot is not with bad intention. If the calf drinks a bit, if it's able to suck a bit, but it's not very strong, what people will prepare, they have good colostrum, they've invested, either from the cow or a replacement, they get the calf to drink. He gives half a quarter of the bottle. I'll come back in an hour or 2 hours. That'll be stronger now. Make him drink the rest of the bottle. But don't do this. It's not in bad intention. But what you do then is that the calf drinks a bit. There's some milk is in contact with the mucus in the intestine. The capacity of absorption disappears quicker. So when you come back 2 hours later, he will have lost that capacity of absorption. So what you have to do is really give the maximum of colostrum as quickly as possible. If it doesn't suck or not strongly, I would encourage you to intubate. So you should have a tube to direct feed to put that colostrum or the 150 grams right in the first meal. It's going to warm them up. Will take advantage of most absorption. So to do this, it might be intimidating to intubate, but I will encourage you to consult your vet to show you the technique, the proper technique. And the other thing is there is a site, so the internet site, Beef Cattle Research Council, there's a lot of videos, tutorials, and one that's really well done on how to administer or feed with a tube. It's easy to access. I invite you to go and look at that video. So don't wait. Don't give small meals split up, even especially if you have good colostrum. Give it all at the same time. It's the best there. Even if they don't drink as well, the second meal, we don't wait to break the link between the calf and the mother, but are delayed. but you have to give the maximum as soon as possible. In terms of the tube, I want to show you a recommendation. You should always have 2 of them at the farm. One that's reserved for the birthing calves that would be without disease, and one for sick calves. Maybe you already have one to give electrolytes and so on. You should always have 2 of these. They have to be properly cleaned. And if you start to see little spots in the corner, you throw it away. Change it. It doesn't cost much, because if you give colostrum in a content that's contaminated, you will limit absorbing antibodies. So we have 2, one for the sick, one for the birthing. So that's it for colostrum management. Any questions at this point in terms of managing colostrum? So we're good to go. So we'll go to vaccination. The next 2 parts is I'll talk about vaccination on young calves. It's very brief, because honestly, we could done a complete presentation on this topic alone. But I'll try to give you the idea, show you that it is a very good practice to vaccinate, especially for diarrhea, but also for pneumonia when it's necessary. So, the number 1 cause of death on meat calf and the neonatal period is diarrhea. The diarrhea can be caused by different types of pathogens. There could be bacteria, E. coli. You see causes of diarrhea in terms of risk, in terms of days. So you said there are different types of agents that can cause diarrhea, like E. coli, salmonella. We have rotavirus, coronavirus, and also parasite, the Cryptosporidium. E. coli has the specific characteristics of hitting hard in the first 48 hours. The calf with discolors becomes dehydrated, dies within 24 hours. It's E. coli. But beyond 3 days, you might have rotavirus, coronavirus, and crypto. It'd be a good idea, if you have episodes of diarrhea, to take a sample to analyze. Now there are quick tests, rapid tests that allow you to determine what type of prevention to apply for E. coli, rotavirus, coronavirus. It's well prevented with vaccination. For crypto, it's separate. To have a diagnostic test that allows you to target treatments. So, it's no use giving antibiotics. Sometimes it can harm the calf development. So I encourage you to take samples as needed. So you have to understand that those viruses, those bacteria, pathogens, parasites are present in often with the mature calves. If I took a sample of manure with the adults, probably I would find rotavirus and corona. They're not sick, they can manage it, but for a calf, it might be more difficult. So what happens, those are often present in the environment, which means that diarrhea will appear. So there's factors of risk that show up. So the main factor, it would be a failure to transfer immunity. So if you didn't get the colostrum, that's number one cause of diarrhea. That's something to go and check upstream how the colostrum is managed. So population density, different ages between your calves. So this may cause diarrhea to appear. Sometimes it's difficult to control those risk factors. Maybe you can't control temperature variation. So it's important to, it could be interesting to work with vaccines to increase prevention. And there are different products are available. Those available, Scarguard. These are all products that are administered to the cow before birthing, except for Guardian that can be administered to the calf when it's born. The advantage to vaccinate the mother before giving birth, by doing this before birthing, you foster the production of antibodies that are specific to the pathogenic agents that cause the diarrhea. So it's going to produce antibodies, and it may help her to excrete less of those viruses in the environment and reduce the contamination in the birthing areas and so on. As we know, the calf will receive those antibodies when it gets colostrum. And if you give a bag of colostrum in powder that you dilute, then no use to vaccinate the mother because they don't get the antibodies from the mother. So it's important. It's a mistake that happened before. A producer vaccinated the mother, but also gave the colostrum in a bag, but one negates the other. So if if you vaccinate the mother, the calf has to get the colostrum from the mother. So she's going to start to put the antibodies in the milk about 5 weeks before birthing. And we try to to vaccinate before that period, about 2 months before the first birthing. And they need a booster 2 to 4 weeks later. So sadly, those antibodies are not eternal. So if you have a long gestation period, it might be recommended if it's over 6 months, it could be recommended to revaccinate the mothers after 3-4 months to ensure a good protection. So the higher risk are the ones later in the birthing period because they're post-older calves. Keep in mind that there's nothing miraculous. It's not a magic solution. It's not a silver bullet. It's something that we do that must be integrated in a global and overall program to control diarrhea. Good management of colostrum, as we've discussed before, to make sure there's not high infection pressure in the environment. So that's it for vaccines for diarrhea. Any questions at this point? It's good. I believe that Guardian, if I recall, is injected. I should know this by heart, but I'd have to, if somebody can look on the internet quickly, I'm not as familiar with this one, but I believe it's injected. The second aspect of vaccination, for which the second disease for which we can use injection, and we have performing ones here, is the respiratory diseases with pneumonia. That's the most important one. The most important one for the meat industry and bovines in North America. And that's why we recommend to vaccinate before auction. It's a big issue. So I'll give you an example. This is a healthy lung. So pink like a sponge, and I'll show you the lung of a lung with anemia at the finishing stage. So fibrosis, hemorrhage, there's no more air coming in there. So major problem for finishing barns. Calves that arrive from different areas, they're put together and they're at risk of respiratory diseases for the first 30 days after they arrive. A lot of focus put on that, but also problems and also with younger calves. So she says, give me a minute to the respiratory diseases, even though the colostrum will really help young calves to protect themselves, it can still happen that on calves that still got a proper colostrum, that have good, that had a good immune transfer. Well, you have to keep in mind that antibodies gotten then from the mother, they're not eternal. They have a limited life cycle. So it's more, it's approximate here. You know, the birth and immunity level. You can see over time, 2 months, 4 months, 8 months. We know that the calf, when they get the antibodies, has a good level of antibodies, but they are not eternal. So they will gradually diminish over time, or for a few weeks, a few months. In parallel, the immune system will be developing, but it takes time to be properly mature and able to build their own antibodies. So it takes a few months. So between both of them, if there's microbial pressure in the environment, maybe there's pneumonia and you have a young calf, 2, 3, 4 months, which is in that period more at risk, it's possible that you get episodes of pneumonia, even if the calf got antibodies. And to illustrate this, I'll show you the results of a study that took place in the US. 7 ranches, 28 group of calves analyzed, about 6,000. So you can see the number of pneumonias as a function of the age in days. So 143 days, 5 months, 6 months, and so on. So what was observed is that there are 2 peaks where those pneumonias can appear. There's a first peak at the first month after birth. That's probably those who didn't get the not as good a transfer from the mother. Even if they got some antibodies, that's the first peak there. And then 3 to 5 months, that's the time when the calf has less antibodies from the mother, and its own are not as developed. Its own immune system, so they can protect themselves. So why don't we just? There's always the different vaccine. Something Covishield or whatever before they leave for the auction, but there's a problem. Is that the injectable vaccines don't work well if there are the mother's antibodies still left, so it interferes. So you vaccinate the calf, but the antibodies of the mother will connect with the vaccine, so they're not going to develop antibodies and have a weak immune system. So intranasal vaccination was a solution to get around that problems of interference with the antibodies from the mother. So by vaccinating the calf through the nose, it's the entryway for viruses anyway in the nose. So you get immunity response within the nose, so they can't get far. Also, as well, there are cells that respond very quickly. So if we vaccinate through the nose, the response is very quick immune response within the day itself. So it's quick, it's good compared to injection, which is 10 to 14 days before it get good immune. So good, quick immune response. What's great is that the vaccine will function even in the presence of mother's antibodies. So that's why we talk a lot about intranasal vaccination. It's the efficient way that we found to make sure, even with constraints we have, to make sure we have a good immune response. So we have a variety here of vaccines that are available now. I have to say that my colleagues at Merck did a lot of work with Bovilis Nasalgen 3-PMH. They're able to put together a combination, all the respiratory virus, except BVD and the bacteria that can be involved in such an infection. So that's great. It's a very good product. There are others that exist. There's Enforce 3 from Zoetis company that has been proven, have a lot of data. It's really efficient and can be used in combination with one-shot BVD. There are others, companies that, Nazim, all BRSV, through the nose, also Iprobovis, Somni, Key. I don't remember the ecotoxin. It's basically what those vaccines allow you to be a bit more intervening depending on the high level of risk in your herd. So it can be administered very young, even in the first year of birthing. It's a cure for the calf, the mother. And when we do give it through the nose, and then we revaccinate with the injectable after 5-6 months, then the response will be that much stronger response to the injection. So if you keep heifers, if they've gotten a nasal vaccine after birth, they'll be more protected later on. And I always invite you to consult your vet to have the best program for your herd. I am not into recipes, you know, except for the necessity to get fetal protection for reproducing females. I think that's essential, but vaccination of young calves must really be discussed with your vet to know what product to choose. There's several of them on the market. What is the most adapted to diseases in your herd, and at what time, when it has to be administrated with the risk you have and your constraints. So I would encourage you to consult your vet, but the tools are there. There's practically no reason to live with big cases of pneumonia with your calves. You have the tools there to help you. So I think some questions have come in.
Thank you very much to our translator here. He does have to duck off, but we are able to take a couple questions, and hopefully Virginie will be able to translate in French and English. So we might be asking a little bit more.
Okay, no, that's okay.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much, Ronald, for translating for us this morning.
Merci,
Okay.
Ronald.
Oui, allô, Virginie?
Oui.
J'avais une question comme si que il donne le vaccin nasal en même temps qu'il injecte quand qui rentre l'automne. Comme
Oui.
je connais quelqu'un qui vèle sur le pâturage, mais là, quand il rentre l'automne, c'est là qu'il donne le vaccin nasal avec le piqûre de Bobby Shield en même temps. Ça,
Okay.
c'est pas meilleur.
Ben, OK. So, c'est Duncan, c'est ça? C'est ça?
Oui.
Okay.
Oui.
So, Kelly, the question was, I know people that when the calves...
Je peux le dire en anglais, là.
Oh oui, vas-y donc, Duncan.
Okay. So I know people that they calve on pasture, and then when they bring them in the fall, they do the nasal vaccine plus the the injectable Bobby Shield. So I was wondering if that's good or bad, or it's probably better than nothing.
Okay, so okay, it's not better. It's not how can I say that? It is not something that I encourage, because you better split the two products to get the maximum of them. The thing is, okay, if you give, you're gonna give the intranasal, you'll have an answer, immune response the same day, okay, for most of them. And the injectable will give you an answer, maybe a protection 10 days later, 7 to 10 days later. Okay, but after that, you cover the same thing. You know what I mean? So your only gain is the first 10 days. So I think that if someone, which is not bad, but if you are ready to pay for two products, I would prefer to split them so you can cover a longer period of time. So let's say that you give the intranasal at birth, and you will have a protection for 2-3 months, and then you give the injectable later. Est-ce que c'est clair, Duncan?
Oui, mais c'est dur, sur le pâturage, comme c'est dur de les poigner et donner un vaccin.
Absolument.
C'est pour ça, oui.
Ben, en fait, si quelqu'un est prêt à faire la combinaison des deux, tant mieux. Le gain, c'est 10 jours. C'est juste ça qu'il faut comprendre. Mais si dans un élevage, c'est possible que dans l'élevage, ce 10 jours-là soit au risque de pneumonie. Donc, peut-être que ça vaut la peine. Mais si dans l'élevage, la première semaine qui suit l'entrée n'est pas nécessairement suivie d'une période de pneumonie, que ça arrive un petit peu plus tard, genre quelques semaines plus tard, je sais pas si ça vaut la peine à ce moment-là.
Okay.
C'est juste, c'est de l'argent, mais je trouve que c'est un budget de vaccin, mais qui pourrait être potentialisé. So my point was, if there is no risk of pneumonia after entry in the first 10 days, you won't have much of a gain to give an intranasal with the injectable. But if that's a high risk period, yeah, probably you should think about giving the both vaccines.
Merci.
All right. I'm going to turn it over to Brenda to wrap us up for today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Filteau, for taking your time to prepare this presentation and deliver it for us today. Greatly appreciated. And
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We will be recording this and posting it on our YouTube channel in English and in French, so you can view it later if you think you want to review or miss something.
Okay,
Thanks
thank
so
you
much.
very much. Have a nice weekend, everybody.
Thank you. You too.